Many thanks for the invitation. I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. So the reason why I ask you to join me today, among other things, I love people that are passionate about what they do, and I came across quite a few of postings that you posted on LinkedIn and so on. So you're very involved, very passionate about different topics within cybersecurity, compliance, and so on. But just to get warmed up, Olga, how did
Sure.
you get into this? Walk me through memory lane a little bit and how you started in the space.
Obviously, to be honest, it is quite rooted in the past. So my dad works in the IT sector, meaning that even when I was a small kid, I was somehow interested in all the stuff he was doing. Back then, he was operating as someone in the IT field, and I always had a lot of books on Microsoft certifications, and I even had a lot of passion for computers. I built my first computer buying some components from different stores when I was 10 years old. But time passed and I decided to study law. And after my law degree, just by coincidence, I figured out that there might be an opportunity to get both of my passion topics, meaning law and tech, together. And since then, which was 2016, I was strongly only working in the IT field, advising IT companies, advising different companies on their IT contracts, on their privacy regulation. And this is how things, yeah, actually developed. So it's not that I was just hopping on a train saying, oh, great, cybersecurity is a topic which is hot right now. So let's figure out what's going on. It was rather a long development. And actually, I believe, truly believe that's the most important to do things in life you are really passionate about. And I'm really passionate about, in the end, pairing law and the advancements of technology all together to have something, yeah, something workable for the clients and also to acquire new knowledge on this intersection of topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be talking a bit about that intersection, which I think is super, super interesting. And it's really interesting that I've talked to quite a few folks that have had influence from their parents, right? So they just by living through osmosis, almost like through technology, and the parents were technical, or the parents were doing something else. I've come across somebody who did not want to do what their parents did, and therefore pick something else. But let me ask you this: so it wasn't for a lot of people. If they like technology, they don't necessarily go into law. Law and law degree is a lot of reading, a lot of writing, not necessarily tinkering and pulling things apart that a lot of people in the cybersecurity space are. So give me an idea of why you decided to go into law, and then from there, how did you find out that there's a, a lot of relevance in that intersection between law and cyber and compliance?
Sure. So basically, some people still think that it's an awkward definition, but in my opinion, or at least for me, it makes perfect sense. I always say that law is basically mathematics with words. What does that mean? I know that you are from a common law or partly common law legal system in the US. As you might have seen, I have obtained a law degree in the US last year. So I understand that you have a slightly different way of applying law, whereas we in Europe, so to say, have a very different and more, let's say, abstract way of applying legal norms, meaning law text, to the particular case. But in the end, what is important in both cases is the fact that it is illogical. So once you go to court and you have conducted legal proceedings and something will be the result afterwards. Either you are the plaintiff or the defendant, you will still see either you like or don't like the result, but there will be a logic, meaning that you have a particular pattern you always apply to the particular case. And this is what I believe something which is very similar to mathematics, meaning that in mathematics, you also have the rule and you apply it to different numbers or let's say letters, whatever it is. But the rule remains always the same. So basically, I trust that in order to succeed in a way as a lawyer, you need to have a really logical way of thinking. And this is actually taught when you are good at science, also good at math. So in the end, I see that there is a lot of intersection, a lot of overlap. And the second thing is that I was always in love with languages and I speak a couple of them. But in the end, languages are not necessarily logical, but to use the language to do something logical with that is a challenge, but in the end, it is a lot of fun. So that's why I see that technology and law are very much connected because you need to understand technology, the logics, how things work, how coding might work, how, I don't know, software solutions might work, how, for example, contracts are working. I believe that writing a good contract, let's say a good IT contract, has a lot in common with mathematics, like structuring things that they appear logical. I don't say that's the ultimate truth, but for me, it makes a lot of sense. So it was clear that somehow my passion for mathematics and my passion for languages will both find, will both find itself in a law degree. And sometimes I hear people saying that as well. Sometimes I hear people saying law is so unlogical. How can you say that? But at least for me, it is the truth.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that you mentioned specifically there's interesting statistics about the people that are successful doing the LSAT, which is the entry exam for law school. A lot of them, the people that get higher scores actually come from computer science and engineering backgrounds. So
Oh, I
despite
don't know.
and then there's a components, as you mentioned, there's a logic components in the LSAT. So therefore, potentially it has something to do with that as well. So let me ask you this: the intersection between law and cyber and compliance, it wasn't always the case. It seems like the cybersecurity has really evolved, and I would say in the past 10, 15 years. And it seems like every company now requires cybersecurity insurance. They have to, they do. It's some depending on what industry they're in. They're under regulatory compliance and they have to follow certain regulations, but it wasn't always the case. I'm assuming that as the industry evolved, so did the legal body of knowledge and rules and regulation evolved too, right? Because there wasn't cybersecurity and there wasn't a lot of these cases. So cases were starting to build up, right? That there's precedence of something already happened, and then there's case law revolving that. Do you see that on a day-to-day basis? Because you really are, and we're still in an evolving stage. There's still a lot of new technologies that have not come to like AI is one of the examples, right? So I'm sure there's going to be some lawsuits and some cases around AI, but AI is so new, so you have to pave the way. Is this exciting to you to be part of an evolving, even though law has been around for so many years, the intersection between law and cyber and compliance is relatively speaking new. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely. And I believe that one of the most exciting fields to be to work on currently in the legal field is for sure the tech field. Why actually? If we have a look on, let's say, corporate law or the law of securities or employment law, for sure, without any doubt, there will be new decisions coming up, and there will be perhaps new regulation, and perhaps there will be a court case which will overrule another case. That's clear. However, the general framework will always remain the same. We have an employee and we have an employer. The one wants a salary, the other wants the workforce. And here, when we are talking about technology, it's very unclear. We don't have a general framework. Let's put ourselves back and let's say 2015, 2016, when Bitcoin started to gain more popularity and the lines of the newspapers were full of crypto. What's that? What's the technology behind it? You have to admit that there was no real rule fitting to that. And even now, we struggle a lot with technological advancements, meaning that the regulator to come up with a regulation which is fair for all stakeholders involved. And I stick with the crypto case, for example. So we need to take into account the users. We need to take into account the government. We need to take into account tax authorities, consumer protection, the brokers, the platforms, the, I don't know, internet providers, whoever. Everybody has no interest, and it's so hard to have some kind of a joint approach on that. So it takes time. And in this respect, technology is evolving so fast that the regulator is, and also the courts, I don't even want to start to speak about the courts. They all have a huge delay in order to provide fair regulation or fair judgment. And therefore, I believe it's up to us attorneys who are perhaps the first to get the case on their desk, to judge and to tell the client and give the client some guidance, to find some perhaps similar patterns in other laws which might apply here. We are coming back to mathematics, right? That is really a challenge. And for me, it was always clear. I really don't want to just reproduce the opinion of somebody else. I wanted to be the one conquering new areas, finding new areas, and also the one who, with the power of creating similarities and also bringing up the technological knowledge, creating a solution which might sound for the regulator or for the court. And I believe that is much more challenging, at least for me, and therefore is way more fun than just sitting in the library and trying to find potentially applicable decisions, because this is something in the past, but I don't want too much to be in the past. I want to create and co-create the future. And I believe and feel perhaps sometimes as a part of the whole movement, because I'm also moving something. I'm moving to legal towards legal certainty with the approaches I try to introduce. And therefore, I believe that it's, at least for me, as I said, much more interesting and captivating than anything else.
And it's also true on the privacy front as well. And I'll give you an example. The When the internet just started, the amount of information collected from users or about users was fairly minimal due to the fact that it was just the technology was just starting out and there wasn't as much tracking associated. The inception of cookies in a browser was just beginning to emerge. But now, fast forward with the not just with the browser, but the emergence of mobile devices, the tracking, and then with mobile devices, we're talking about the amount of sensories information that comes out from these devices. Um, all of a sudden, that type of collection is available to these corporations and so on. So there's a lot of regulation. So that also had to be put in place, because now you can quite a bit about a person just by the way they browse and where they are and time of the day. And even if you have a wearable, now you can associate it with your blood pressure and your heart rate and whatnot. And there's quite a bit of privacy regulation associated with the new technology. So, how does the law right now, that's my question, catch up to that as well?
That's absolutely true that I guess that just 6 data points are enough to identify the particular person out of 8 billion people worldwide.
Well,
And I believe that the fact that I think every 2 years, the amount of data collected just doubles. So for sure, we need to have not a privacy framework in just one country or another country or one state or another state when we are talking about the US, but there should be a global standard. And I guess that here, at least here, Europe is a front runner. So we have introduced the European Privacy Directive, the Data Protection Directive before, and then when the GDPR entered into force, that was a big thing for European companies, but also for companies worldwide, because that was the point when regulators worldwide, let's say Brazil, for example, with the LGPD and other regulators started to copy that framework. Copying sounds like counterfeit, but actually, let's put it as they got interested in what Europe was doing and how it was working, and therefore created something similar. But I see that there is a huge shift towards weighing privacy and wanting to create particular rules. And when we have a look in the US, all the time it was California, which was the front running state in that respect, creating a lot of regulation and also having consumer rights, or particularly having consumer rights in view. Now other states are coming up. So we see that there is a general shift towards privacy, saying yes to privacy. And I believe that's, I don't know, perhaps it's even too late, but in my opinion, it's better to start late instead of just not doing anything. And we will see how it will work in practice. But in general, I like the fact that we have this shift and that regulators and especially companies, businesses who process personal data, or PII to say the US version, they understand that it is also an obligation on their side to protect the privacy of their customers, their consumers, of their employees and others.
yeah, and it's a fine line. It, the companies want to make money. That's what they're there for. And then there's also this whole convenience thing, right? I would love to, for a company that I have a relationship with, I would love for them to know everything about me if that helps me have a better, customer service, or they can offer me things that I potentially can like. So there's a fine balance between that being provide amazing service and needing to collect that information about you, and then the privacy associated with it. And then we can apply the same reasoning between national security and privacy,
Mhm.
right? The amount of data collected on citizens and so on in the sake of national security. What is the, in your opinion, the balance between that, between the privacy, the rights for privacy, and the rights for a country to protect itself?
There is one important thing to know in general when we are talking not about the US regulation, the European regulation, and every regulation worldwide, actually. There is a tension for sure between the right of the human being to dispose about to whom data will be disclosed and to whom data will not be disclosed. And of course, whatever kind of governmental interest, for example, national security. So when we compare, for example, the regulations in Europe and the regulations in the US, we see that everything is streamlined in that respect, meaning that also in the European Union, for sure, the governmental institutions such as the police or the prosecution, they will have access to your data, and they will use this data, for example, to investigate on crimes. So there is nothing like an absolute protection of privacy.
Mhm.
Privacy is a very important right, right? However, there are also other rights, and it is important to bring everything in balance. And this is, in the end, the the task of the regulator to do. So it is not that there is any country worldwide saying that nobody, also not in case of a crime, the prosecution will not receive your data. For sure not, because the national interest in that respect will overweigh the right to privacy.
Mhm. And there are certain ethical boundaries between the collection of data for national security and then the right for privacy and the right for the citizen to be private, to not disclose that information or be monitored on a constant basis. So who defines these boundaries? And I'm assuming because you're talking about the EU, we talk about different countries, so each country has its own level of boundaries. And it seems like there are these boundaries are also dynamic, meaning all you need to do to have is some case of active terrorism or some sort of even the change of regimes, and then all of a sudden what the boundaries get stretched or get moved around. So whatever was in the past where boundaries are no longer there. Can you comment on that?
Sure, I totally agree that some countries have a slightly different approach on determining what is a suspicion or what is a terror act of terrorism or what is a crime or what is a misdemeanor. And that is something which is in the disposition of this particular state. And therefore, we cannot say, oh, there is a general rule. There is none. The only thing we can say is that we have the OECD, we have the principles of the OECD, and one of the main principles in that respect will be the principle of appropriateness. Giving you an exaggerated example, there is perhaps no appropriateness in place when we are gonna just track every particular citizen without having any suspicion, for example. Or there will be perhaps no appropriateness installing everywhere or setting up everywhere a CCTV just to monitor everybody. On the other hand, when we have a particular suspicion that somebody committed a crime or something similar, then we might start our investigation. We can start to collect data, and then piece by piece, in case this suspicion becomes more and greater, we can collect more data because the appropriateness in that respect will say, okay, so the suspicion is rising, and therefore our allowance to collect more data is also rising because that's appropriate. As a general rule, there is no way to say this is okay or that is not okay. This is always a case by case definition and decision. But the main aspect which is guiding us is the appropriateness. We have some case law on appropriateness, but in general, you should just ask yourself, do I really need this data in order to achieve the purpose I want to achieve with data processing conducted? And that's it. However, some countries are more strict, some countries are less strict. That also depends a lot on the, uh, let's say, general legal system and also the way how law is practiced. However, I believe that appropriateness is a fair guidance just to give you an idea which might be okay and which is certainly not le- legally or at least not not to be for not appropriate in general. Yeah.
Mhm. And to play a devil's advocate, and it's funny because I'm asking a lawyer, is pun intended. But if you don't collect all that information and all that data, then how do you then know when it's appropriate to elevate? It's almost like you part of the collection is to find out those individuals or groups of individuals that require additional scrutiny. But if you don't collect anything because of due to privacy, then how do you know? How do you know which individuals need to be elevated? It,
Absolutely. It is like a vicious circle in that respect.
yeah.
And fairly speaking, there was a court decision by the European Court of Justice quite some time ago on the question if there can be an information storage just for no reason.
Hmm.
We
That's
just
right.
store the information of citizens in order to perhaps in the future, I don't know, access this information because we needed to investigate. And the court said that's not okay. That's not appropriate to put everybody under suspicion. So there is a thin line, as you mentioned before. And for sure, we need to find a kind of balance between the right to privacy and also our interest as the government in terms of national security, for example. But at least in Europe, the court said when there is really no purpose just to collect data in case you might need it someday, and perhaps, or in the most majority of cases, you will never need it because fortunately that there are not so many crimes committed, at least not every citizen is committing crimes, then there is no purpose. And the collection of data for no purpose is certainly prohibited by the OECD principles, which stick to data minimization, meaning that we collect only the data we really need to achieve our purpose. And also the storage limitation. We store the data only as long as it is needed to achieve the particular purpose. So that is to put in line with those principles. And therefore, we need also to value as a society. And there we understand that law is not making, has no end in itself. Law is made for people, right? And here we say we value the right to privacy higher than perhaps, I don't know, enforcing any kind of criminal enforcement in the future, which is unlikely to happen. And this is a decision of the government, actually. And therefore, I'm happy that those OECD principles and the Court of Justice exist.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that laws are generated and followed because of the people, right? But with that said, I'll say that sometimes the logic behind laws is not necessarily something that is evident for the a citizen. There's certain rule sets that are applied, and some people would say "Well, it doesn't make any sense." But in the grand picture, grand there's people that are very smart folks that are in the Supreme Court and so on that are responsible for making these decisions. But in the eye of the individual, some of these don't make any sense. So it really depends. And let me ask you this: do you find that there's certain emerging technologies such as quantum computing and potentially AI that are being used maliciously, or not even maliciously, but used by governments and corporations to collect additional information, which potentially can can cause additional privacy concerns? And I'll give you an example. AI is being used now to sift through massive amount of data and create correlations and causations to information that wasn't possible before, and to do that at such a
Mhm.
speed that that's remarkable. So, what's your take on that?
That's a very, very, very deep question. And I guess that there is a lot of things to comment. I just try to answer briefly. I
And by
think
the way, Olga,
for
we this is a completely unscripted conversation, and I tackle with some very difficult question. Are you doing? phenomenally well. So just so
No
the audience
problem at
know,
all.
with these questions are not, I have not sent these to Olga in advance. So whatever Olga is coming out with, just so you know, it's in the moment, and so you're not being judged by any like the quality of the answers or in particular. It's just a matter of this is a tough question to answer. There's no right answer.
Yeah, and the point is this question is so broad that and the answer is even broader. The point, in my opinion, is that we were never faced with such a fast technological advancement before. When we are speaking in math again, there is no linear growth, but an exponential. And what we need to understand is that we will always be behind. We will not have the opportunity to not be delayed because technology is emerging everywhere around the globe and the regulator is always behind. So it's always a retrospective view. However, I believe that the main issue is that we are losing the truth. I had a nice conversation last weekend with a friend of mine on that we were talking about the fact of statistics and what is true on the newspaper and not. And I said, with all the technological advancements, especially when we are talking about deepfakes and the way how you can use media and how you can use especially social media and how can you can use artificial intelligence for that, there is perhaps no opportunity anymore for a regular person to really find out what is the truth. And this is something I'm very concerned about, to be honest. As much as I love it with technology, I understand that technology goes hand in hand with a lot of social responsibility. And we need to understand that it is great that you can just adapt my voice and put it in Spanish, or you can just use this video and make whatever kind of jokes with that. This is the fun part. And perhaps I'm even going to laugh, or even certainly I'm going to laugh. But it can be also used for malicious purposes. And also, when we are talking about cybersecurity, it is clear that the criminals, those who we are fighting against, they use and are already using artificial intelligence, for example, to create very legit looking like phishing mails. So it is getting even harder for us, for every company, but also for us as a society to fight that kind of technological advancement, which is perverted to the bad. So we need, in that respect, in order to secure our societies, use the technological advancements to the good and to fight criminals, for example. And in my opinion, beside the fact that we are losing the feeling of what is true, the second thing is that we need to start educating people. We urgently need to start educating society on the technology, on artificial intelligence, not in a way that they need to start coding or something like that, but they need to understand where this technology goes hand in hand with threats and how to avoid becoming a victim, for example, of a phishing attack or something similar. So we are forced to move because we are facing so many different issues for our society that there is no way also to go back. I doubt that we will ever in any time go back and will use typing machines or writing something with a feather. I don't think so. So we need urgently to make clear that using a smartphone is not a skill in that respect, but understanding perhaps how a smartphone works and operates and how to understand what is a real email and what is a phishing mail. That is very important. So there are many things I could comment on that. And I believe it is just important to understand that there is something to work on for us as a society because The technology makes it hard for us to go and to pursue the goals we have. And therefore, we need to make use of this technology to achieve those goals. Otherwise, we will not be able. So, saying that to fight all the cyber security incidents right now, it is also a matter of making artificial intelligence working for us and not against us.
Yeah, for sure. And do you think that eventually the government would and they're always laggards in terms of their regulation that they're putting on. Do you think that at some point in time they'll try to enforce a certain regulation around deep fake, for example, or using AI in certain ways and chatbots but it seems like we're behind. Even as you mentioned, phishing and business email compromise, it's been around for so long and it's causing billions of dollars in damages. Every day you hear about somebody get that wires a certain amount of money and never to be seen again. Do you think that the government will try to somehow limit some of these technologies to, again, in effort to protect the citizens?
Because even if the government would want to do that, how do we want to do that? We are out of the scope to control that. Just taking into account the Italian Data Protection Authority. So a couple of months ago, I guess it was in March this year, they banned ChatGPT for the violation of the
Yeah,
GDPR.
I remember that. It was actually, believe it or not, there was a lot of like almost derogatory comments online with people making fun of the Italian government and so on, because it was almost like an attempt that does not, as you mentioned, it's like how? Yeah, you can just try to ban it, but uh, it's not possible. People still use it on their phones, for example. You know?
Absolutely. And the point is that, okay, after months, I guess, they resolved the issue, or at least they resolved it on the paper. But the point is, it's easy. If there is something banned and we see it in different countries, people just start using a VPN. Okay, you can shut down one VPN server, you can shut down the second one, but you will never be able to control all the VPN servers popping up worldwide and people connecting with it. So, in the end, I believe that the better approach is to educate people instead of banning things. For sure, there should be something banned, like perhaps particular drugs, but also there are countries where particular drugs are legal and in some countries they're not. So in the end, it is for sure the decision of each and every government. But in general, I would agree on the fact that we need first and foremost educate people because there is nothing bad in large language models. There is nothing bad about the technology. It is about the question how you use it. There is nothing bad about driving a car. But if you use a car to, I don't know, to create a damage. That's not okay. So will we now ban cars? For sure not. So it is about the particular use. And when we are talking, once again, going back to generative AI and things like that, when we are starting to feed the algorithm with sensitive data, when we are starting to put on PII or similar, for sure, this is not okay. And we should not do that. But therefore, we should have guidelines and also or especially do trainings with our employees and tell them that's not okay. And that's the reason why it's not okay. So please, if you want to do a great LinkedIn post, or if you want to do, I don't know, like a new email marketing campaign or similar, just delete the personal data beforehand and ask the generative AI afterwards. That would be perfectly in line, at least with the privacy regulation. So I would say that it's like a knife. You can use it to chop your vegetables. You can use it to harm someone. It's not about the instrument itself. It is about the way how you use it. And therefore, education is very important.
Yeah, and I think that the even in that particular area of education, we're behind. I think this is something that needs to be taught in early stages of school, for example, the kids needs to start learning because there are kids that nowadays have phones at a very early age, and they're being exposed to all kind of messages that potentially can be harmful, and they're not real. A lot of these are being generated on the fly, and so on. So, talking about regulation, let's shift gears for a bit about talking about specifically about upcoming regulations like the NIS2, the European Union Network Information Security. For those who are not familiar, I'm like in New York, so we're very US centric, but it seems, as you alluded to before, there's a lot of regulation that start, let's say, in the EU and then getting adopted by the US and vice versa in each state. And there's a lot of, it seems like there's a cross pollination between different frameworks and different regulatory frameworks associated. And there's also a lot of overlap, meaning certain regulations, for example, for compliance and privacy, are very similar in nature, despite the fact that it might have different names in different countries. So, talk to me about what that means, specifically the NIS2, and how do companies need to prepare for what's coming?
This too is actually a very necessary directive of the European Union. It means Network Information Security Directive number 2. So in the end, there will be this directive, or there is this directive, which is obliging the member state of the European Union, currently 27, to transform it to national law without undercutting the general level of protection. In the end, or in a nutshell, huge companies which are important to the market, let's say insurance companies, or let's say electricity supply or similar, they will need to have particular standards in order to ensure that they have appropriate measures taken to ensure their information security. And in particular, this directive aims to, it aims at least, to have a more or less united level of protection in the European Union, so that this whole economical area, the companies having their seat in this economical area, have a protection towards attacks which are actually increasing day by day. And therefore, the regulator understands that a lot of companies are not willing to do it just because it is important, but they will need to be forced to do it. And that's why they introduced the NIS2 in Europe. And for example, next year by October, the companies which are subject to that regulation will be will be will be in charge of having transformed their businesses, their processes, in order to be in line with this tool.
So, let me ask you this. There's a lot of these regulations that are, if you're a large company and they have a team of people in place, and you're aware that something's coming down the pipe, you have a project in place to with timelines to get to be compliant. If you are a small, medium-sized business that still needs to be compliant, it's very tedious. It's very costly for the business to become compliant. And yes, maybe they don't want to, or maybe they just don't feel that they need to secure themselves a certain way. But isn't it inhibits business in some retrospect, where it the backbone of the economy is the small, medium-sized businesses, but yet they're being forced to comply with some regulations that potentially can be very costly to implement?
As mentioned before, the law generally has no end in itself. So enforcing the law and obliging companies to introduce particular measures, it's in the end still for the best of the company. Because once you have a business which is not able to operate anymore because there was a massive cyber attack and all your machines were encrypted and the backup was on the same servers, for example, and you did not introduce particular measures to have a secure backup and to be able to have, I don't know, to be able to conduct the business further on, to have a business continuity in place, that will ultimately kill your business.
But
And
is
unfortunately, yeah,
Olga, not to cut you off, but that's isn't it what capitalism's supposed to assist? Like people want to stay in business, and therefore they'll make sure that they have all these things in place. Or why not create maybe not a compliance framework, but maybe like a suggestion framework where saying, okay, these are the things you need to do, and mm, it will help you stay in business. Do you feel that the compliance enforcement, as you mentioned, legally enforcing these is necessary?
fairly speaking, a lot of companies, they are just not aware of the business risks they are facing. This is what we see in our day-to-day business as a company assisting in this respect. We see that companies think that they have a virus scan and that's okay. But a virus scan is so much 1995. This is not how you are going to be able to fight sophisticated malware, for example. And companies, they simply don't know. I don't know about other countries so much, but I have a view on the European market, on the German market particularly, and also on a couple of other markets. And I see that, for example, in Germany, there's a high demand in cyber security professionals, but there is a very low supply. So people who could be able to make the C-level aware that there should be an investment in cybersecurity, there should be an investment in endpoint protection, there should be an investment on trainings, there should be a regular plan when to patch the systems. They don't exist or they are not working for the mid-sized companies. And those companies are actually the ones which are most at risk, the backbone of our economy. Because on the one hand, they might struggle with regulation, they struggle to be aware of the fact that they are subject to regulation or about particular measures to be introduced. And on the other hand, a lot of them just say, nothing has happened so far, so I'm not interesting for the ransomware groups, for example. But this is unfortunately the wrong way to approach things because exactly those companies are very interesting for the ransomware groups because the ransomware groups also know that they are not investing into cybersecurity. It is way harder to breach or to get into the systems of a huge multinational group of companies than to, I don't know, like we call it in Germany, hidden champion, the mid-size companies which are just producing something very important. They have a turnover of a couple of
Yeah,
millions,
for
but
sure,
still,
Olga. And that's also the issue with the supply chain because these organizations are all majority of them are supply chain for a larger organization. You're right. It's harder to get into a very secure large company with multiple layers of security. It's easier to get into potentially the supply chain. And I also like to maybe throw it out there that maybe it's not the fact that there's a shortage of talent, and maybe it's shorter of companies willing to pay for that talent. Once again, if you are willing to pay for enough, you'll get the right talent. It's just that they maybe can't afford it, or they're not willing to pay that amount. So that's another, at
yeah,
least, observation that I've seen. And it's again, it's a fine balance between creating that protection and inhibiting business, right? Is you can say, okay, let's do an open market where it's a wild west, everybody can do whatever they want, and let the stronger survive. Those ones that are going to get breached and they're going to go out of business. Eventually, who's going to be left is the secure companies, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be around longer. But I guess that
I agree with you. And
So
just to share how, for example, the small businesses or the nonprofits even survived GDPR, right? Because there was the same discussion about, wow, that's so expensive, and how should we comply with the regulation and in that respect. And I like the fact that a lot of data protection authorities, not just in Germany, but also, for example, the French or the Spanish, they have created a huge download part on their websites to help those small businesses or nonprofits to supply them with the necessary information, to supply them with templates and description how to fill in the necessary information in the templates. So this is what I very much, because this is also a thing. There should be always an appropriateness. And I'm certainly not the one, and I'm happy not to be a politician, perhaps, in this respect, because to find an appropriate way and to balance all interests is fairly hard. However, I believe that the regulator, meaning the government in the end, has also a duty not to leave all those small businesses, nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, and so on alone, but to help them, to supply them with the necessary knowledge. Because what we see, of course, a lot of things are from the technical side coming up, but a lot of things are organizational measures, meaning training for employees. So basically, a phishing mail or something like that, not to be opened. So here I see very strictly the regulator, the authorities who should enforce this regulation, that they should help and supply the businesses with, I don't know, material and perhaps trainings, whatever is possible, just to help them and not to let them alone with the regulation and the fines arising out of the regulation for non-compliance.
yeah, and we've seen that too with the supply chain, right? So you have, depending on how critical supply chain for a larger organization, they'll they come across with some, yeah, issues that they maybe in the annual or biannual review, they sometimes they'll help them fix it because they know that the potentially the company itself does not have the ability to do so. And so we talked about NIS2. Let's talk a bit about the Dora. Was
Yeah,
like when I would think Dora, I always think like Dora the Explorer, but it's not.
unfortunately not.
So talk to me about that type of regulation. What does that mean? And what is the cause of that new regulation coming down?
DORA is an abbreviation for Digital Operational Resilience Act, also another regulation coming up in the European Union, and we actually have a bunch of them. I even stopped counting on how many different obligations the particular businesses will be faced with when it's coming to really complying with all the laws. So it seems that in Brussels, they're doing a great job in creating new laws. And for sure, a lot of companies, a lot of businesses see it as a massive problem, because financially, this is one thing, but also operationally, it's a lot to implement and to adjust all the processes. When it comes to DORA, it is mainly for the financial regulation, for the financial regulated institution, meaning, for example, banks. And it is important to understand that banks are part of the critical infrastructure. And therefore, we don't want even to think about what will happen if our banks are stopping to regulate. There are, when we're talking about Germany, for example, the German regulator BaFin, they have particular rules on how the IT needs to be structured, or how the business continuity needs to be operated and stuff. But in the end, here the European regulator decided to have a uniform solution in order to enhance the security and the operational ability of the financial institutions across European Union. So this is another rule on how to, let's say, make your business secure towards whatever kind of risks and threats which may in the end lead to a non-operating bank, for example.
Mhm. Do you think that this particular regulation is gonna have any impact on
Yes.
consumers? In what way?
And consumers, I believe that it will have the good thing about Dora will be that the consumers will not understand that there is Dora. What do I mean with that? When we are talking about a soccer match, we're not that much into football in Europe, I'm sorry. We say that a good referee is the one we don't see on the field, that all things are operated smoothly. If there was I don't know, a goal, somebody striked or so, that's fine. So we count it and we continue the match. Once the referee becomes like a player or very present in the game, then the referee is perhaps not a good referee. And I believe in that respect that Dora will just provide us with the same availability of banking services, meaning that everything is smoothly. As we know, or we have seen at least, that threats are rising, different threats. I'm not just talking about cybersecurity. I'm talking about whatever kind of things which might happen and which might interfere with a smooth operating financial service. We will understand and see and feel that as a consumer because the ATM is not working or I cannot, I don't know, pay my bills on my online banking app or similar. So in the end, I believe that the customer will not know anything about Dora, and that should be the goal we should achieve. That the customer just sees everything is operating, everything is fine, my bank account is fine, so it's working. There is nothing where I should be worried about.
Yeah, so you're talking about specifically about operational resiliency, right? In this particular case, the banks operate, and then the consumer does not know what's going on behind the scenes. But in particular, Dora, how does that going to impact the operational resiliency for the European Union banks? What are the implications?
In the end, the implications are as with every act which creates resilience or at least regulates more in a compliance manner. So we will have risk management. We will need to have for sure an information and communication technology risks management. That is how it is called. We will need to have particular measures in place in order to achieve the smooth operation. And therefore, some banks are perhaps already having that standard in place. Some banks will need to introduce particular new measures to create this resilience also when it comes to, let's say, testing scenarios and things like that. So in the end, it is just increasing the level of stability, the level of resilience, and that's it. And every bank will need to check whether they already have those measures in place. So in the end, it will be a gap analysis between what we have right now and what will be the yeah the outcome toward in order to comply with DORA.
Mhm. And Olga, do you think that it's going to set some precedents for banks and banking system outside of the EU? Do you think that's going to trickle down to other
Mm,
countries, or is it something that's going to stay? And then maybe just last question in regards to that is there a deadline like GDPR was when it had a deadline? Is there a deadline to become compliance with this particular framework?
In the end, I believe that Europe is a quite good blueprint. So we are trying to introduce new laws and see how it works. And then other countries, as I mentioned before, with the GDPR, for example, when you're talking about Brazil, they have adopted a similar framework. And also they have learned from those, let's say, regulation or pieces of regulation which were not that smooth. So I believe that the threats we are trying to fight with the DORA, so to say, they are these are uniform threats which might occur in South Africa or Australia or Colombia or in, I don't know, the US. There is no border anymore since we are all connected to the internet. And therefore, I can certainly imagine that parts, at least parts of Dora, will be also introduced somewhere else. Because in the end, when a solution is working, why should we refrain from also implementing the same solution? This will at least save us a lot of costs and also a lot of time because we already see that something is working somewhere else, meaning in the European Union. So I believe that there will be a particular effect of the export of that regulation.
Yeah, it's going to be more than they always say that there's things that get exported from the EU and vice versa from the US. And it seems like this particular area is also going to take effect into the wider picture in financials. As you mentioned, the threats are fairly uniform across the board. So it's not we don't need something like that here. So we're running out of time. I had a bunch of other questions, but we've done a phenomenal job. But let me ask you this: two more questions. One is, what type of services do you offer? How can people reach you? What's the best way to engage you? And what is your ideal customer? What type of cases or type of engagement do you like to have? That's number one. And then the other question is, after that, is what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Okay. Basically, we are a boutique law firm with several lawyers who are just working in the IT field, meaning that it's about IT security or it's about IT contracts, it's about privacy or about new technologies such as artificial intelligence and similar. So we don't do anything else more or less than just being very specialized in this field. And we do different services in that respect. We negotiate or draft agreements, but we also represent our clients, of course, or before authorities. We advise them in the introduction of new technologies in their companies and also create a lot of corporate governance for them. The ideal client for me would be a company which is brave to have very new technology, which is interesting for me, captivating me. What I also love to digitize old, so to say, companies, meaning those which are for a long time on the market, but which are now wanting to shift in the new era and want to adjust their processes and want to create something new. So it's all about digitization, whatever kind of request might come. If it is about IT, and then it's the right company, so to say, to approach, there will be something for sure we will be very passionate about. And the second thing, how it's best to reach out for me, it's either on my LinkedIn, meaning Olga Stepanova, or it's on my email address, stepanova.byte.law. So you can already see in the name what we are actually doing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Olga, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me today. Much appreciated. And I can't wait to see where you go next, like in terms of the legal work that you do. You can tell that you're very passionate about this and you're very interested in as you mentioned, the intersection of law and tech and innovation in tech and cybersecurity. So I'm looking forward to maybe having this conversation sometime again in the future. There's so much to talk about on a day-to-day basis, right? AI is advancing. There's just so many different areas, as you mentioned, digitalization of everything, and then with that, the what it causes, right? There's always going to be the need. The lucky thing for us is that we're always going to have more need of people like yourself and people like myself that to be able to consult and work with these companies as we progress into the future. So until then, thank you very much, Olga, and looking forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you very much. Thanks all for joining,
Thank you for your time.
and I'll see you at the next episode. So until then, stay safe online as well as offline. I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.